The Bhagavad Gita says that there are 4 types of people in the world. The 4 types are Bogi, Yogi, Sannyasi and Jnani. The Bogi is one who is looking for fulfillment out in the world. He is a materialistic, sensual, worldly person. As against this, the yogi, sannyasi and jnani are spiritual and they are in various stages of spiritual development. So the bhogi is full of what is known as kartrutva bhavana and bhoktrutva bhavana. He's full of the doership and enjoyership attitude. He feels that this is it. The 16th chapter of the Gita, he puts it beautifully. He gives asurik bhava, the worldly person, a demonic person. His attitude is, the world and all that it has to offer to us, that's all there is. There's nothing else. As against this, the first step to the spiritual path is when you start thinking, what is this life that I'm leading? Is life all about acquisition, ambition, moving from one increment to the other, from one promotion to the other, from one job to the other? Is that all that life is all about? Is life all about merely upgrading one's car, upgrading one's furniture, getting a better home, getting a better carpet, getting a better car, perhaps getting a better wife also? Does it never occur to us that at some point in time we need to turn our attention to bettering ourselves? What lies within? What are my shortcomings? What are my faults? What is the potential? The tremendous potential that lies hidden within. What am I doing about it? But we have no time to think about this because we are under this silent assault, well, not quite silent, assault of the media that drives us to eat more, consume more, live the way that they want us to. It's not just the media, the advertisers, the marketers. Somebody out there is pressing the buttons and we're dancing to their tune. Someday you must call their bluff. Someday you must say, no, I will decide how I want to live. I will decide what I want to wear. I will decide what to eat and what not to eat. Life can't be just about acquisition. When summer comes, change your wardrobe. When winter comes, what is that shawl? Jamar? Yeah. One jamawar to the other. Whatever it is, I'm not familiar with it. It can't be just that. The more you preoccupy your mind with that, you become a bhogi. What you need to understand is a bhogi will never ever find fulfillment in the activities that he is engaged in the life that he has carved out for himself. At the end of it all, a bhogi only eats sin, as he says earlier. Mental agitations. And these mental agitations all pile up and together put you in a state of depression. It causes all kinds of symptoms like insomnia, hyperacidity, this, that and the other. And when you get that, it's difficult to trace back and say, where have I gone wrong? So a yogi is one who understands that his life is blinkered, that his vision is myopic. And he breaks free from this bondage and has the vision of something higher, something nobler, something beyond material things that one can aspire for and reach. And so a yogi is one who performs actions dedicated to self-purification, Atma Shuddhaye. Such a person instantly becomes free from the vagaries of the world. You're no longer affected by profit and loss. You're no longer affected by the pairs of opposites that the world has to offer to you. You find your fulfillment within. In the very attempt at self-development, doesn't matter whether you achieve success or not at that. The fact that you're trying it, the fact that you're looking within, itself gives you a certain peace, a certain happiness, which is unparalleled in any outward endeavor. At least this shift we must make. Once you make this shift, the rest flows, the rest follows. And Krishna says elsewhere in the Gita, as a person who makes this change, the world engineers things in such a way that things are made conducive for your development. It's so true. Everything else falls in place. All the things that you were worried about, all the things that you were anxious about. Oh, how am I going to make both ends meet? How will I get my daughter married with this income? What is going to happen to my son? All kinds of worries and anxieties we have. All of that falls in place. Exactly the right thing happens. It's impossible for you to work things out like that. All that you have to do is dedicate your actions, dedicate your life for Atma Shuddhi, self-purification. And things fall in place. And as you go along, you get more and more focused on not just self-purification, you get focused on Atman. So a sannyasi is one who dedicates his actions. All this is given in the 5th chapter of the Gita. Someday I hope we'll get there. Well, not too far away. A sannyasi is one, you see, when you work for self-purification, when you have a higher ideal, when you dedicate your actions to something higher, success automatically comes to you, prosperity comes to you, name, fame, all these things come to you. How do you handle it? If you're not prepared for it, a non-spiritual person gets toppled by this. It goes to his head, as we call it. But a spiritual person is able to hold it in place because he moves to the next phase called sannyasi, where Brahmani adhaya, he says. He dedicates his actions to Brahman. And then he is freed from the ups and downs of the world. And he gives the example, he says, like Padma Patram Ivambhasa, like a lotus leaf in water. Just as the lotus leaf is born in water. Pankaja means born in mud. A lotus leaf is born in the water and in the mud, exists in that muddy water and dies in the muddy water, but is never tainted, never affected by the muddy water. Similarly, a sannyasi lives in the world, transacts with the world, interacts with all of us, but he's untouched by the ups and downs of the world. Exactly like a lotus leaf is untouched by the mud. Padma Patram Ivambhasa. So what is important here is Brahmani Adhaya. Everything you do it for Brahman, for reaching Brahman. And while you're doing it, you remember that it is Brahman that is enabling me to perform these actions. That's a wonderful concept. Most of us have forgotten that. In the Kenopanishad, he gives a story. The story is that of the Devas and Asuras having a battle. They fight furiously for days together. And at the end of it, the gods, the Devas, win victory over the Asuras. And while they're celebrating, when you celebrate, what do? Yeah. How do you celebrate? With what? You say cheers and bottoms up. And while they're doing bottoms up, they look up into the sky and they see an apparition, Yaksha, which they don't know. Now gods are supposed to be all-knowing. And there's something out there that they don't know, so they get totally confused. Their celebration, their party is all gone astray. Because now they focus on, let us find out what that Yaksha is in the sky. So they send an emissary, and the emissary they send to find out what that Yaksha is Agni, fire god. Agni goes towards the Yaksha, and the Yaksha, the apparition, has the audacity to ask Agni, who are you? You understand what it is? Fire comes to you, blazing fire, the whole element of fire. If a candle light comes to you, you understand it's heat, it's fire. Here, the whole element fire goes to Yaksha, and the apparition asks, who are you? So he says, his ego is hurt. And he says, I am Agni. Then to add insult to injury, he asks him, what do you do? He says, I can burn anything in the universe. So Yaksha says, really? Puts a blade of grass before him and says, Trunam, can you please burn this for me? Agni is even more insulted. He says, what kind of a job has he given me? And he says, okay, let me burn it. Tries burning it, nothing happens to that blade of grass. The temperature doesn't rise by 1 degree centigrade. So Agni says, okay, let me release all my power. And he releases all his power. Still nothing happens to that blade of grass. So he turns, right about turn, comes back to the Devas. Opening batsman out for a duck. And he says, I don't know what that Yaksha is. So they send the second emissary, Vayu, the wind god. Same story. He goes there, the Yaksha asks him, who are you? Vayu says, again his ego is hurt. He says, I am Vayu. You know, it's like the President Bush comes here and you ask him, who are you? And he says, I'm President Bush. And you ask him, what do you do for a living? It's as ridiculous as that. So Vayu says, I can toss anything in the universe. Again, the Yaksha very respectfully puts a blade of grass before him and he says, can you blow this away, please? Again he tries, he thinks it's, what is it you call? Baएं हाथ का खेल. So he tries, nothing happens. He tries with all his might, still nothing happens. Second batsman out for a duck, comes back. Then they understand this, the Devas, the gods understand this is something not within our reach. So they send a real powerful emissary. This time they send Indra. Indra, the god of gods. Indra represents the mind and intellect. Indra approaches, but this time as against Agni and Vayu, who approach egoistically with arrogance, Indra approaches that Yaksha, the apparition, with humility. And when he approaches the apparition with humility, the apparition vanishes. And in its place appears Uma, the radiant, beautiful goddess, daughter of the Himalayas, representing the scriptures. Uma represents the scriptures. And Indra asks Uma, what is it that was here before? Uma replies, and that too in the next chapter, that which you saw was Brahman. Now the point is, what we are discussing here is, when you work with egoism, when you work with arrogance, when you work with this Bogi's attitude of doership and enjoyership, Brahman switches off. That's what happened. To Vayu, that's what happened to Agni. Brahman simply switched off. When Brahman switches off, it's like the power connection going off. I hope it doesn't happen here. That's the only thing left to happen. When the power goes off, all the equipments go. Right? Everything goes. Similarly, when Brahman switches off, you're not able to function properly. Your faculties are useless. Agni is not able to burn the grass. Vayu is not able to blow the grass away. Similarly, when you and I are filled with arrogance, Brahman switches off. All your faculties are taken away from you. You meet with failure. Second, with the organs of perception. Agni and Vayu represent organs of perception. You cannot perceive God, you can't hear God, you can't taste, smell, touch God. How you can get to Brahman is with humility. If the mind and intellect approaches it, you get it indirectly through the scriptures. That's why it's called Guhya Shastra. Guhya Shastra means it's a secret Shastra. It's not what is apparent. You can't take the words of the Gita and get to realization. You have to get to the spirit of the Gita, which is beyond the words. So, a yogi is one. Yogi, sannyasi, jnani are the spiritual people, are those who approach the subject with humility. Even here, if you are full of ahankara, kartrutva bhavna, bhoktrutva bhavna, you have to return and say, I don't know what God is. I failed. Many of us start with the right intention. Somewhere down the line you take a somersault. You go the wrong way. The attitude is wrong. You don't go beyond the words to the spirit. So, as yogi, sannyasi, jnani are those. Once you start, once you become a yogi, you dedicate your actions to the higher, prosperity rains down on you. But even that prosperity you have no value for, because what you're searching, what you're pursuing, what you're trying to get at is that which is beyond the world, the transcendental Brahman. So when you dedicate your actions to Brahman, nothing in the world affects you. Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tyaktva karoti yaha. One who performs these actions, dedicated actions, without attachment. Lipyate nasa papena. Such a person is untainted by sin. And then the last is jnani. When you reach the state of realization, you declare, Naiva kinchit karomi. I do nothing at all. Yet the jnani does everything. Jnani is one who has become one with Brahman. Brahman doesn't do anything. Brahman empowers everything to function. Brahman facilitates everything. Brahman enables everything. So a jnani is one who does everything. A self-realized person is one who performs the most powerful actions, most dynamic actions. And yet he follows the attitude, I do nothing at all. What humility! Utter humility. The higher you go in the spiritual ladder, the more humble you are. Recently, at a classical music concert in Pune, Pandit Bhimsen Joshi made this statement at a press conference. He says, now I'm beginning to understand what Rag Yaman is. You know who's saying that? Not a student. An authority in classical music says, now I'm beginning to understand what Rag Yaman is. That is humility. Because you understand, a spiritual person understands that the personality, the individual is nothing compared to the totality. Whatever action you perform, yes, you have contributed a little bit maybe. But the contribution of the totality is so great that yours pales into insignificance. And even what little you do is enabled by Brahman. So there's utter humility in whatever you do. So these are the four types of people: Bogi, Yogi, Sannyasi, Jnani, and their attitude towards action. Now, till yesterday, we have been going through this up to verse 19, the logic, reason for action. And now, in verse 30, he gives the most brilliant definition of perfect action. If you follow this one verse, you can't go wrong in life. Just this one verse. In all these days, in these 6 days, if you missed everything else, it doesn't matter. You remember this one verse, it will make a big difference to your life. And let's see what it is. Verse 30.
Mai sarvani karmani सन्न्यस्याध्यात्मचेतसा निराशीर्निर्ममो भूत्वा युध्यस्व विगतज्वरः.
Fight, surrendering all actions to me, focusing thoughts on the self without expectation, minus or frenzy. This verse speaks of what is perfect action. All the components of perfect action, this can be divided into two sections. One section is how do you use your body, mind and intellect to generate more energy and dynamism within your system, and the second section deals with how do you prevent the dissipation of this energy that you have generated into unproductive channels. So the 6-point path to perfect action deals with, number one, how to generate energy within your system. The first thing is adhyatma chetasa. Focus on the ideal. With your intellect, you must focus, first of all, fix a higher ideal, whatever it be. The absolute ideal, here he is speaking of the absolute ideal, therefore he says, the thoughts focused on the self. Self means Atman. So the highest ideal that you can have is that of self-realization. If you can't bring yourself to, if you can't be inspired by this absolute ideal, bring it down, lower it down to a relative ideal which is still beyond your selfish, self-centered interests in life. There are so many causes that one can espouse in this country. So many things that you can work for. So many things that you can do to contribute meaningfully to society. Fix a goal, fix an ideal. And then the intellect must focus all your thoughts on that ideal. Then you generate energy. Many of us are inspired to do something, especially when you're discussing the Gita, like now. But the moment it is over, you're deflated. As somebody said, motivation is short-lived. And therefore, you need that motivation every day, just as your body needs cleansing every day. You can't say, I had a bath last month, so I don't need a bath. Every day you need it. Similarly, you need to inspire yourself, motivate yourself with a higher purpose every day, all the time, constantly. It is this constancy of thought that generates power. It's not vague, stray, inconsistent thinking. It is consistent thinking of your goal. Fix your ideal and get after it. The greatest of people, the greatest achievers in the world are not necessarily brilliant people, are not necessarily more intelligent than us. The best people in the world, those who have contributed the maximum, who are the greatest achievers in the world, are those who have chased their ideals consistently. Whether it's an Einstein or a Newton, whether it's a Bill Gates or an Alexander Fleming, whether it's a Sachin Tendulkar or whoever, they have pursued it consistently. This is the difference between us and them. We might be more intelligent, but we haven't pursued our goal consistently. Even in nature you find. You see, children play with this. They hold a convex lens in sunlight and they keep a paper below that. What happens to the paper? If they hold it at the right distance, what happens? The paper burns. The same rays of the sun which fall diversely, they're not focused all over, they don't burn paper, they lose power. But when you hold a convex lens, the convex lens focuses all light rays to a point, and if you hold the paper at that point, the paper burns. Wind focused in one direction generates power. Water flowing in one direction generates power. Similarly, thoughts focused on one ideal, one goal in one direction generates power. So whatever be the field of activity you're engaged in, Whether you're a sports person or a musician or a chartered accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, what is important is focus. Or a spiritual person. In the field of spirituality, it is all the more important. You can't do spirituality part-time. There's no such thing as part-time pursuit of anything for that matter. It has to be full-time, consistent pursuit. Thinking. And then you generate that power. Second, the mind